Welcome, everybody. Today is the second session, and I named it The Chemical Wedding and Alchemy. So last week, we talked about, we defined what Rosicrucian is all about. I introduced the three major works and talked mostly about the first two pamphlets. We talked about theories, the Mahatmas statements, and Helena Blavatsky's information. And I just want to add one thing. So a big part was the letter of Hiraf, and this was 5 lawyers that one of them, Helena Blavatsky, had to deal with in 1875 when she purchased some land. And the Hiraf is the first letters of each of the 5 people who wrote the letter, and they were all very interested in occultism. Last time, there were excellent questions at the end about the Freemasons, and I believe I answered it, but I just looked up because it says the origins of the Freemasons are obscure. It may have been an outgrowth of Rosicrucianism or not. And then we had an excellent question about what a Theosophist is. So Theosophy is the teaching about the divine and the world based on mystical insight. And that's why I mentioned Jacob Böhme, who was called the Christian Theosophist in the Middle Ages, because he had these mystical experiences and insights. But nowadays, very often when we talk about a Theosophist, it's a member of the Theosophical Society that was founded in 1875. I do want to add that not everybody who is a member of the Theosophical Society is also a Theosophist, really applying what we teach and learn, as is not every Christian who belongs to a church really a Christian. Another good question was this connection between Rosicrucianism and Theosophy, and I'll talk about this next week also. But there is a book that you can find for free online that was written by Magus Incognito first, but then later on it was discovered that it was William Walker Atkinson who had written this book, and he passed away in 1932. And in part 1, he says the following. He says, "For many years, little or nothing was permitted to be revealed to the general public concerning the secret doctrine of the Rosicrucians. But during the past 25 years, there has been a greater and still greater freedom in this respect. Until today, many important Rosicrucian teachings form a part of nearly all writings and teachings upon the subject of the esotericism in general, and of the higher metaphysics in particular. Theosophy and the general interest in Oriental philosophies and religions have done much to bring into public notice some of the more elementary points of the secret doctrine of the Rosicrucians." Because now we can talk freely about religion, we can share our opinions. There is no danger as it was when the pamphlets were published. As I mentioned last time, Harvey Spencer Lewis was the founder of AMORC, which is the biggest modern organization of Rosicrucians. And he had a very positive view about Helena Blavatsky, and I wanted to share this with you. He said, "And my high praise for her attainments and service to mankind is not because she was also a Rosicrucian and passed out of this life happily wearing the Rosicrucian emblem as the most important symbol in her life. I admired and loved the work and achievements of Madame Blavatsky for years before I knew the truth about her Rosicrucian connections." Now, I take this with a grain of salt, because we don't really know. I mean, he says that, we can't verify that, but in the end, they all go back to the ancient teachings. And he said she was a martyr of the Great White Brotherhood, and for this reason, all Rosicrucians, all true Theosophists, all lovers of truth and human brotherhood and light, life, and love will remember her and continued to place fresh flowers at the foot of her invisible and immortal monument. And one of the reasons I wanted to share this, because it shows this tolerance and this support for somebody who comes from a different tradition. And I think this is the spirit in which we have to look at all the teachings. And that brings us to the chemical wedding. So it was published in 1616 in Strasbourg, and it was in German. At first, the author was anonymous, but all historians agree that the author was Johann Valentin André, because he more or less admitted that in his autobiography. Some historians say that he wrote this very early in his life, basically before the other two pamphlets, that he was not even 20 yet. We can't verify any of that. They also say that the name used at the beginning wasn't even Christian Rosenkreuz, but I thought that I should mention that. It is an allegory of a path of initiation, a spiritual quest. The book is about the marriage of a king and a queen, but it is also about the union of the inner and the outer in Christian Rosenkreuz's nature. And it is about the initiation of Christian Rosenkreuz in the guise of a marriage and an alchemical process. And in fact, there is never a marriage taking place. So let's look at the summary. I'm just pointing out the most important things. So Christian Rosenkreuz is 81 years old, and he describes in this story his adventures over a 7-day period in 1459. On the first day, he was summoned to a royal wedding by a winged messenger. On the second day, Christian leaves his retreat, and after various incidents, he arrives at the summit of a high mountain and then passes through a succession of 3 gates. On the third day, he and other people who are invited are being tested. They are weighed on scales. And if they are considered virtuous enough, they are allowed to attend the wedding. So on the fourth day, he meets the king and queen and watches a play in 7 acts, depicting the relationship between God, Christ, the earth, and the bride. And in effect, the interplay of the 4 elements. The king and queen are beheaded. And then on the 5th day, the coffins containing the corpses are loaded onto 7 ships bound for a distant island. At the destination, they are placed in the Tower of Olympus, a curious 7-story edifice. On the 6th day, there's a strange ascent of the guests through the 7 stories of the tower. At each level, under the direction of a maiden and an old man, they participate in alchemical operations. Now, that part is a little bit confusing. The 7 alchemical operations. So first, they are distilling royal skin. And then the liquid that they get out of it is transformed into a white egg. And then a bird is hatched from that egg. And then the bird is beheaded and decapitated and reduced to ashes. And then the guests attending the wedding, they are building 2 little figurines. They are human-shaped out of this, what's left over. And then these figurines are fed, and then the spark of life is put into them. And then at the end, the king and queen are restored to life. So on the 7th day, they are accepted into the Order of the Golden Stone, and all, including the queen and the king, return to the castle. However, Christian Rosenkreuz, at the time of his first day in the castle, committed the indiscretion of entering the mausoleum where the sleeping Venus reposes. His inquisitiveness condemns him to become the guardian. But then suddenly at the end of the story, so the narrative ends with his return to his cottage. So these are the most important parts of this chemical wedding. Neither historians nor I can make the claim that we can explain or reveal all of the meaning of the chemical wedding. But there are very important themes in this story and this and symbology, and this is what I would like to point out. So first of all, we have royal weddings. They occupy an important place in alchemy because it's about the conjunction of opposites, the union of seemingly separate elements to give birth to and reveal a higher form. And Carl Jung showed that it was particularly well suited for describing the phases of the process of individuation, because the wedding of the king and queen represent the union of the two polarities of being, leading to the discovery of the self. He wrote a lot about psychology and alchemy, but it's a work that he finished in 1955, where the chemical wedding is really a key element in his thinking. The wedding location is a mountain. That's the point where the earth and the sky touch, the abode of the deities of revelation. The theme of the castle is important. The quest of the soul is often presented as the conquest of the castle. We have here the climb of the mountain and ascent, which is the quest for the self. And the number 7 plays a major role because it takes place on 7 days. The building has 7 floors. The coffins are put into 7 ships. And the process of the elaboration of the great work is in 7 phases. And so the number 7 symbolizes perfection. The chemical wedding, it's not only the style, because the style is different too than the 2 first manifestos. It differs considerably from them. Because unlike the manifestos, which address the transformation of society, the chemical wedding is concerned with the inner transformation of the soul. It is a deeply interior work, one which asks the reader to step into its world of symbols and walk with Christian Rosenkreuz along his path of transformation. Next week, I'm talking more about Dr. Franz Hartmann and all the books he wrote about Rosicrucianism. But one of them is The Secret Symbols of Rosicrucians. And he describes the fraternity as a secret society of men possessing superhuman, if not supernatural powers. They were said to be able to prophesy future events, to penetrate into the deepest mysteries of nature, to transform iron, copper, lead, or mercury into gold, to prepare an elixir of life or universal panacea, by the use of which they could preserve their youth and manhood. And moreover, it was believed that they could command the elemental spirits of nature, and knew the secret of the philosopher's stones, a substance which rendered him who possessed it all-powerful, immortal, and supremely wise. So this gives us an impression what the occultists really knew about these Rosicrucians. And there were a lot of books written about not only the Rosicrucians, about the alchemists and their abilities. One thing that I want to point out is the elemental spirits of nature. So in the manifestos, it is said that when Christian Rosenkreuz, I believe, was in Fez, he learned about the elemental spirits of nature. And it was Paracelsus who wrote about them. And we find out more about the sylphs, which are the elements, the spirits for the element of air, and the gnomes, which are the spirits for the element, the earth element, and the mermaids, the water element. They're also called undines sometimes, and the salamander for the fire. So what was the problem? Well, many modern compilers of reference books about alchemy fell into the error of supposing that the alchemy referred to what was performed wholly upon the plane of matter and concerned only with the transmutation of elements, or metals. And they were completely ignorant of the fact that the alchemy which attracted the Rosicrucians and which took up most of their time and attention was the mental alchemy, the spiritual alchemy, which is very different. Even though there is a correspondence to the material alchemy based on the law of correspondence, as within, so without. In fact, Helena Blavatsky, in this article, A Few Questions to Hereafter, to these 5 lawyers in the US, I believe they were from New York, actually, she said this particular order manifested itself as an antidote to the general tendency towards the material side of alchemy, which honeycombed the educated classes of Germany. So what is alchemy? Why did this word become so important? Well, HPB said it was the most misunderstood and veiled of all sciences. Veiled because it was dangerous. You didn't want to get the information into the wrong hands, and you wanted to make it veiled so that only those who had, I would call the key, those who were initiated, the key to all these secret messages, did understand it. There's even, it's even not clear if the word comes from Arabic, alchemia, or from the ancient Greek alchemia, which is the fusion of metal. And there are 2 different approaches. The one is the exoteric, the preparing of the substance, and the second one is the esoteric or mystical, which has to do with the inner transformation. So with the fall of Alexandria, alchemy made its way to the Arab world. So I think it was, other historians, but I remember that Lachmann wrote in his book that in the 12th century, Arabic alchemical texts were translated into Latin, mostly to Spain. And if you go on the internet, you can find out names of many very well-known alchemists. And they were not only in Europe, they were in India, they were in China. I named already Paracelsus and Jacob Böhme, but I also wanted to mention a few others. For example, Mary the Jewess. I was so excited. I remember years ago when I did research that, this was a woman and she was an inventor because she came up with these 2 instruments that are used in the laboratory. Many of you might have heard of Nicholas Flamel. Richard Smalley, in his book Hidden Wisdom, mentions Jean-Baptiste von Helmont. And HPB said for sure Robert Flood and Thomas Vaughan were 2 alchemists. Now, on the right side, you see this gold coin that is from a museum in Vienna, in Austria. And in the 4th line, you can see Leopold I. So it was created by the alchemist Johann Wenzel Seiler in 1672 for Leopold I. And you can see it in that museum. So any alchemist has to have a profound knowledge of the fundamental mechanisms of nature. But that's not enough. He needs to consider the spiritual aspect as well, which is generally invisible to the sensory perception of the operator. And when it comes to researching alchemy, you realize that the duality of method is extremely important, because it is about matter and it's about spirit, and the one doesn't go without the other. So even if we want to be spiritual, at the same time, we have to be grounded. And that is emphasized in this dual approach. And in the old days, they recommended that if you were an alchemist and you did the laboratory work at the same time as the spiritual, that you would be in, that you would have, even if you had only one room, there would be a separation. And in one area, you have your instruments and you work on the material aspect of alchemy. And in the other room, you do the introspective part. So this is what Franz Hartmann said about alchemy. He said, alchemy is that science which results from a knowledge of God, nature, and man. And here the number 3, like we have in the Alchemical Wedding, the 3 gates, which is so important, the Trinity, to understand that. He said, a perfect knowledge of either of them cannot be obtained without the knowledge of the other 2, for these 3 are one and inseparable. I always think when I read this, to know thyself, right? We need to know who we are, and then we will understand the divine, and we need to understand nature. And alchemy is not merely an intellectual, but a spiritual science, because that which belongs to the spirit can only be spiritually known. But he says, and he expresses it so well, he says, it is a science dealing with material things, for spirit and matter are only 2 opposite manifestations or poles of the eternal one. Thus, we need to understand the dual approach. So there's this book called Alchemy and the Secret Doctrine, but it's not written by HPB. Somebody compiled all the articles and passages that in which she has written about alchemy, and I have it because it's very helpful. You don't have to search all her writings, Colette writings, or Isis Unveiled, or the Secret Doctrine. She said it might have started in 144 BC because it was written in a Chinese edict, or it might have been a book written in Egypt around 200 BC. But she said also that the main line of development began in Hellenistic Egypt, in particular in Alexandria, agreeing with the historians. But just like with astrology, it fell into profane hands. And she said it was, after some time, no longer the pure and divine science of the schools of Thoth Hermes of the first Egyptian dynasties. That brings us to Hermes Trismegistus. He's very important for the alchemists because they saw him as their Moses, who had handed down the divine commandments of their art in the emerald tablet, also known as Tabula Smaragdina. He was believed to be an incarnation of Thoth, the Egyptian god of wisdom and the scribe of the underworld, who came to earth and reigned as pharaoh for over 3,000 years. I just want to add that HPB thinks that Hermes Trismegistus is actually a generic title. For her, she said it was the personification of the voice of the priestly caste of Egypt, that is to say, of the grand hierophants. So the emerald tablet was discovered by an Arabian initiate or Alexander the Great. It's not quite clear. And it contains in a few sentences the essence of Hermetic wisdom. Now, we all have heard, as above, so below. That's the most important wisdom. But in this book I just mentioned, Alchemy and the Secret Doctrine, because it's only a few sentences and there's so much wisdom in those sentences. So I decided that I would share this tonight because it's so beautiful. And I don't know whose translation she used. You can find different translations online. But the first one we know, that which is below is like that which is above, and what is above is like that which is below, to accomplish the wonders of one thing. As all things were produced by the meditation of one being, so all things were produced from this one by adaptation. Pointing to this, what we call in Theosophy, the absolute, the one. We all derived from that one being. Its father is the sun, its mother the moon. It is the cause of all perfection throughout the whole earth. Its power is perfect if it is changed into earth. Separate the earth from the fire, the subtle from the gross, acting prudently and with judgment. Ascend with the greatest sagacity from the earth to heaven, and then descend again to earth, and unite together the power of things inferior and superior. Thus you will possess the light of the whole world, and all obscurity will fly away from you. This thing has more fortitude than fortitude itself, because it will overcome every subtle thing and penetrate every solid thing. By it the world was formed. How beautiful. By the way, she used not subtle, but subtile, but maybe that was more common. It's a synonym of subtle. Maybe it was more common in England. So what she adds, and she said, what is this mysterious thing? Well, this mysterious thing is the universal magical agent, the astral light, which in the correlation of its forces furnishes the alkahest, the philosopher's stone, and the elixir of life. Hermetic philosophy names it Athoth, the soul of the world, the celestial virgin, the great Magnus. So I believe I mentioned Eliphas Levi last time. He passed away in 1875, the same year the Theosophical Society was founded. And he came up with this astral light. So his notion of the all-pervading astral light was adopted then by HPB and used in her writings. And you can find it in everything, especially in Isis. She quotes Eliphas Levi in Isis Unveiled and in the Secret Doctrine often. But I do want to say that, the astral light is just the dregs of the Akasha. So it's on a lower level. If you look at the 7 planes of man, it's on the level of, on the etheric plane, and the Akasha is on the mental plane. So one has to really pay attention when reading about Eliphas Levi and the astral light. He did not study Sanskrit, and so for him, he means sometimes astral light and sometimes he means Akasha. So let's look more at what this Athoth is. So you see the first 2 letters are in red. The A is the first letter in the alphabet, and the Z is the last one. So it's like the alpha and the omega from the Greek alphabet, the idea of the first matter and its transformation. It's seen as this universal solvent. It's also considered to be a universal medication and the essential agent of transformation. And it was thought of for in alchemy. It was in the end the aim, the goal, and the vision of many alchemical works. So why do I have here a picture of Paracelsus on the right? Well, you see Paracelsus, and in his hands you see a sword. And he's said to have had this sword always with him. He even supposedly slept with his sword. On the top, on the sword's pommel, you see the word, maybe you can recognize this here, Athoth. So it is said that he had in this sword's hollow pommel miraculous powder capable of transmuting metals, healing diseases, and transporting bodies from one place to another. during one part of his life, he was really taking care of wounded soldiers, and there can be there's quite a lot of information about his unusual treatments. One thing, what I really find extremely important about Paracelsus, he did not deal only with the external body of man. He dealt also with the inner man and with the world of causes. And he never left out the side of the universal presence of the divine cause of all things. In fact, for him, it was very important to believe in the divine, or God, however you want to call it. And he would call a doctor who didn't have a good character and didn't believe in the divine a charlatan, a quack. So that was very interesting. Again, here from Eliphas Levi. So as I mentioned, he wrote 3 important works about magic. He came up with the notion of the astral light. He wasn't the first one. There were others who had discovered it before them, among them Paracelsus. But they used different names for it. One name, for example, was Odd, by a German gentleman named Karl von Reichenbach. Anyhow, so he said about the Asot, or universal medicine, he said, it is for the soul, supreme reason and absolute justice. For the mind, it is mathematical and practical truth. For the body, it is the quintessence, the 5th element, which is a combination of gold and light. In the superior or spiritual world, it is the first matter of the great work, the source of the enthusiasms and activity of the alchemist. In the intermediate or mental world, it is intelligence and industry. In the inferior or material world, it is physical labor. I really want to address the 7 stages of alchemy. And there are lots of articles written about it. You can find it online, and you find it in books. And there are 2 articles. One is by, I think his name is Dennis William Hauck, which is very extensive. There's a lot of information, but there are others. I thought Mr. Hauck's approach was very good. He explained it through the meditative emblem. So we know that the Azure contains the complete information of the whole universe. It is another word for philosopher's stone. I just wanted to point that out. So this meditative emblem was first published in 1659 in the Azoth of the Philosophers by the legendary German alchemist Basil Valentine. Now, there is not much known about Basil Valentine, except that he had a vast chemical knowledge. It wasn't even his real name, but some historians think he might have been Johann Tölde, a salt manufacturer in Germany who lived roughly from 1565 till 1624. It's like a mandala, and you can, in fact, use this image for meditation. It's not one of the 3 exercises I'm introducing tonight, but I have done this. You can print this out. Look in the middle, you see man. You could also say this might be God. And then you see the triangle, the highest essence of water, which is representative of the feminine. But it's the alchemist. So it's the alchemist in the center, right? And you start from the center when you meditate. You could, I have read, theoretically cut out this middle and glue this to a mirror. Maybe you can even cut it out and put a small photo of yourself in there. But it's worthwhile trying. So let's look at some of that information that we can find on the emblem. So let's start, and I have it in red, with the perfect balance of the 4 elements. So look at it. So you see this body, but you see only the hands and you see the feet, and it's perfectly balanced. So in the right hand, not from my right, but the right of the picture, turn it around, you see the fire, right? So this is representative of the element fire. And then in the left hand, you see a feather, which is representative of the element air. And then you see the left foot in the water. And then you see the right foot on the ground, representative of earth. So there you see the perfect balance, the 4 elements. Now, in blue, you see here on the right, the king. And the king has in his hand a scepter and a shield, which represent authority, rationality, planning. But I hope you can recognize it here at the bottom. Underneath, you see this dragon, right? So this is the rejected contents of the unconscious, all the hidden forces, which might come forward if this king becomes arrogant, if he is prideful. On the other side, you see the queen. She holds the reins to great fish. So she has control over those hidden forces. So in that sense, she can help the king, right? And she represents this feminine consciousness that accepts everything, because you can see the bow and arrow. That's what she holds, which represents the wounds of the heart of the body. So she can accept the world as it is, including all the pain and the suffering. And then in purple, you have on the right side the anima, or the soul, connecting the high and the low. And you have on the left side the spirit, the ever-present spirit. And at the bottom, you have it says corpus, that's the body. And you see those 5 stars? Well, they point to this 5th element, or all 4 elements. So you need all 4 elements plus the 5th, the quintessence, which is in the 5th element, which is invisible. We won't go into details, but very often if you study or if you read about alchemy, you will find the words sulfur, mercury, and salt. And these are the 3 essentials behind anything. They are the celestial archetypes. And sometimes you will see that spirit is sulfur and sometimes it's mercury. It's like the interplay. It's the source of life. And so it's like the yang yin. The one is inside of the other part. And so that's why you can see 2 different explanations sometimes. So we have seen this number 7 in the chemical wedding and how important it is, right? And there are sometimes there are 3 or 4 stages, but in general, when it comes to the Rosicrucians, they talk about the 7 stages in alchemy. You see the words usually very often in Latin. So they support the goal of reaching the enlightenment in this 7 distinct processes. And they are calcination, dissolution, separation, conjunction, fermentation, distillation, and coagulation. So there we are. The first one is the calcination. So what happens? To calcine something is to burn it until it's reduced to ashes. That means we burn away the dross and the reveal hidden essence. And here you have the first ray, right? You see the number 1. And what planet is associated with it? The planet Saturn. And based on analogy, the metal is lead. Now that ray points to the body. And you see even the square symbol of for salt. It's black. And you see a black, and next to it, you see in this picture, the black robe perching on top of a skull, representing this initial black face. And then you see this word visita, which can be visit or start of a journey. On the physical part of it, it's like the burning of excess. So think of the Kundalini process, like we are working ourselves up. That's the physical aspect. And the first chakra has to do with a wise relationship to matter. right? To our body, to the physical universe. And each chakra has an archetype, and the archetype is the of the first chakra is the Earth Mother. So we feel at home with ourselves and being on this planet. That's our goal. And every chakra has, every level has a demon. And the demon of the first one is the is fear. And anybody, you know, that I also teach yoga, and I very often focus on chakras, and standing postures help us to feel this groundedness, this connection with the earth. And psychologically, we are breaking down the ego. Number 2 is dissolution. You will see because there's a meaning to the colors associated with that too. So we dissolve the ashes from calcination either in water or acid or in some other solution. And you see next to the number 2, Jupiter. And the metal connected with Jupiter is tin. And the ray is pointing to the king. So the operation is directed toward masculine consciousness. And you see, hopefully the black crow is watching itself dissolve. It's revealing its purer part. The word that we can see here is interior, pointing to the work within. So again, on the physical level is the continuation of the Kundalini experience to the second chakra, where we opening up energy channels. It has to do with emotions, with pleasure and pain. And the archetype is love, but it's the physical love, the passionate love. And the negative archetype is the martyr, that he denies his own pleasure. And the demon in this process is guilt, feeling guilty. And on the psychologically, we break down the ego even further. Then separation. So the third level is often depicted in yellow. It's the isolation of the components of dissolution by filtration or fractional distillation, and then discarding any impure or unworthy material. Now you see it's Mars next to the number 3. And the third ray is pointing to the fire, aggressive fire, implying this elimination. And you see here 2 birds split into 2 white birds, and they retrieve the saved remains of calcination and dissolution. And terra means of the earth. And we are, again, working up our physically to the third chakra. And like the second chakra, I forgot to mention, hip openers in yoga is, you know, you want to open you to let, to deal with the emotions. And then the third chakra, we talk about twists that have also to do physically with elimination. And so it has to do with our ego and the feelings of autonomy. And it's about personal power. In a sense, we need to individuate. And if we do that, we feel self-confident. And the archetype of the third chakra is the hero, somebody who is not afraid to go out into the world and find his personal power. And the negative archetype is the servant or the slave, which meaning, they follow what other people say and don't think, go within what needs to be done. And the demon is shame. That means not really living your true self. Because you feel shame. And Psychologically, it's what do you discard and what do you integrate when you evolve. Alchemy is about evolution. It's about reaching higher vibrations. The first one, it's usually some kind of light green, yellow green. It's conjunction. So there is a new combination of separated elements to find the balance. And the planet, as you can see, is Venus. And the metal is copper. And before I forget it, if you really want to print out this mandala to meditate on it, there are wrong or different versions on the internet. So make sure, and it has to do with the fourth ray. There's some where the fourth ray is the sun. So, and there's a colored version, and that's wrong too. So make sure that if you do that, that you have the right version. So this fourth ray is pointing to the salamander, which is the symbol of the soul, and it's attracted to the blazing heat of the sun, right? And here you see the two birds of soul and spirit leaving the earth together on this picture, and lifting a 5-spiked crown, and alluding to the fifth element or quintessence, which is recovered from the preceding operation, to heaven. The word we see here is rectificando, which means setting things right. It takes place on the fourth chakra. Very important. That's the heart chakra, right? It's about the gentleness of the heart. It has to do with love, but it's more that compassionate love and not the physical love. And so the postures would be anything that is a backbend, because the archetype is the healer, and the negative archetype is the actor, pretending, playing a role, and the demon is grief. It's very important to remember that it's grief, because a lot of people who grieve can withdraw from their heart and become bitter. And so very important aspect to remember. Psychologically, it's the union of the feminine and the masculine. Also, very often when you think about it, when you work on that, synchronicities occur. The next one is more of a darker green, is fermentation. It's the introduction of new life into the product of conjunction, and it changes its characteristics, and it's raising it to a whole new level of being. The planet you can see next to number 5 is Mercury, and the metal associated with it is Quicksilver, and it touches the bird of the spirit, which is on the left side, associated with the moon and the cooling aspect of the moon. And here you see, this is how it's interpreted: the soul and spirit birds nesting in a tree, brooding over the egg, waiting for the mystical birth to occur. And the word we see here is in Venice, and that means you will discover. And here we come to the physical part, speaking the truth from the 5th chakra. So the 5th chakra is the throat chakra, and has to do with communication and with self-expression. And the archetype is the communicator or the artist, he's comfortable with true self-expression. And the negative archetype is the silent child, afraid to speak. And what is the demon? The demon are lies. Then we come to the distillation, that's indigo, releasing volatile essences from their prison in matter and condensing them in a purified form. The planet associated with it is moon, and the metal is silver. Now, here you can see it's pointing to the air, implying spiritualization. And we have here a unicorn that runs away from everything. It is afraid of or doesn't know whatever, but when it encounters a virgin, it's lying on the ground in front of a rose bush. And the word associated is occultum, you will discover. And the physical is the culmination in the third eye. So that is the 6th chakra. And it has to do with clarity, it has to do with vision, it has to do with insight, with imagination. And what is the archetype? Well, the archetype is the visionary or the seer, but a seer on all levels, correct? And the negative archetype is the intellectual, because the intellectual denies his intuition. And what is the demon? The demon is illusion. So in the fifth chakra, I forgot to mention, it's forward fold that stimulate the fifth chakra, and in balance postures stimulate the sixth chakra. And here's the last one, the coagulation. The fermented child of the conjunction is fused with the sublimated spiritual presence released during distillation. The planet is the sun. The metal associated with the sun is gold, and it points to the queen. But here we have this androgynous youth emerging from an open grave. It's the resurrection of the soul. And the word is lapidem. And so on the physical level, it has to do with the seventh chakra. It's the release of the elixir in the blood that rejuvenates the body into the perfect vessel of health. So when you reach that. But this chakra is really about unity consciousness, right? The archetype is the sage, the wise man. And the negative archetype is the egotist, because he holds on to this belief of separateness, because the demon of the seventh chakra is attachment to the belief that we are separate from each other. And I want to share a few additional comments. So it is said when you read about alchemy that transmuting the lead of ordinary experience into the gold of consciousness means that you must have gold to make gold. And the interpretation would be that you must use what consciousness you already have to create more consciousness. And the whole alchemical process can be seen as an elaborate allegory of the descent of consciousness into matter and its return to its pristine state. And you know, this is 1 hour, but in the alchemical worldview, each metal represents some aspect of life or consciousness. And the first stage is black because consciousness plunges into matter. And the ascent is depicted as a series of changes in color of the material the alchemist works on. And I wanted to depict this by changing the background. One more thing that is very interesting. So if you put those words together, visita interioria terrae, rectificando invenis occultum lapidem. It means visit the depth of the earth. By purifying, you will find the hidden stone. And if you take the first letter of each of those words, it means vitriol, which is known for its corrosive properties to make us work. I do want to add that in his article about alchemy, Hartmann points to 4 alchemical rules. He says you need to follow nature. He said it's useless to seek for the sun by the light of a candle. And first know, then act. So real knowledge exists in the triangle composed of seeing, feeling, and understanding. We really need to know ourselves, have knowledge, be aware, see, feel. Also, he points to the fact that we cannot use vulgar processes. Use only one vessel, one fire, one instrument. And the door to success lies in the unity of will and purpose and the proper adaptation of the means to the end. And he emphasizes that we need to keep the fire constantly burning. If the molten metals are allowed to cool off before they are transformed into higher ones, they will become hard again. But this applies to us too, like to our transformation, to our transformation. When we start the process, we need to go on. Otherwise, we always start from the beginning. And when you read about alchemy, a lot of them say, well, you know, chemistry is just grown out of alchemy. It's just the modern version of alchemy. But there is a big difference. A chemist uses right ingredients and operations. When he uses the right ingredients and does everything correctly, then he will have success. But it doesn't matter if he has a good character. Completely irrelevant. Also, chemists see that what they work with is dead bodies. The first thing we learn, not the first thing, but one of the most important things we learn in Theosophy, there is no dead matter. And they obey the laws of nature, and then they're successful. But the alchemist, it's very different, because the success depends upon the personal state of the operator. Extremely important. He uses forces of life in its operations. This is this interplay between, I would also say, between sulfur and mercury. And he must align himself with the designs of nature. And this is another excerpt from this Rosicrucians and their secret doctrine. The reason I'm sharing this is because of an email I received about, how we are working on ourselves, how we try to evolve. The student who will master the principles herein set forth will have brought himself to a plane of thought which will naturally tend to place him on rapport with the higher teachers of the Rosicrucians and to render him subject to the offer of still higher information, should he desire to proceed further into this great study. Let the student always remember the ancient axiom, when the pupil is ready, the master appears. But the pupil is not ready until he has mastered the elementary instructions, such as is given in the pages of this book. This is not only about the alchemical process, this is also about cosmology. And for example, for me, it was so important to read, like I have, I'm studying the secret doctrine, and not alone, but in a group. And we have been doing that for years. And it's very challenging. But when you reading Max Heinl's Rosicrucian Cosmoconception, I believe the book is called, it helped me to understand the secret doctrine better. And reading this book from Rosicrucians and the secret doctrine, you just see the overlap and, use different words and you understand it better. And with that, I am done. But I wonder, maybe we can discuss it, what techniques make such inner transformation possible. In the laboratory, it might be easier, but for us humans, to have this inner transformation, it's very challenging. And next week, we are going to also talk about the characteristics, how to recognize a Rosicrucian from one of Hartmann's books. So the 3 exercises. So the one is meditation about an emotional nature. Now, we all have weaknesses. As long as we are manifested as human beings on this planet, we have weaknesses and things we have to work on. And in each life, we have certain things we need to figure out and try to transmute. So some are angry, some are sad, some are lonely. So it's worth trying to identify the root of it. So, for example, if it's anger, see if it's because intolerance or pride or disappointment or fear. Very often anger has to do with fear, but also disappointment or being in a situation that you have to do things you really don't want to do. And spend time contemplating the opposite virtue, whether it's peace or tolerance or humility. It's something that you have to work on every day. You can generate an affirmation. The second option, Geoffrey Hudson was a clairvoyant theosophist. And in Theosophy, we learned that we have this antakarana, this bridge between the higher and the lower self. The Rosicrucians also emphasize this, that you have to know yourself. You have to align your will with the will of the divine. And you can only do that when you access your higher self. And he said that he gives you instructions, how to sit, what you think of, what to imagine. And he recommends that you do that every morning, and that you meditate on the higher self. And he gives possible affirmations. And I picked one, and that's the one I use every time. I don't really do the other ones. And these affirmations assist the mind and the will to maintain the concentrated thought and the determined pressure essential to achievement, because he's really saying that, you know, you need to try to connect the higher with the lower self. The last exercise, and I'm going to mention this book again in my last, it's this German book. There is no translation. It's the Secret Teachings of the Occident. And it has to do with attunement of colors. It's a color therapy. Now, this is not something you can do within a week. There are exact instructions how to do that. But this is something that, I don't know, it wasn't that important to me. But if you have issues with the mood, it can be accompany you as stimulant and balance your mood long term. But I, for example, have certain colors in my library and my living room where I work all the time. And then I have this lavender in my meditation room. So the walls are all in lavender. It's all white and lavender. And so colors are important to me, but just to certain degrees, because in general, I'm pretty even keeled.